All right, guys, welcome back to the Elevate My KBB podcast. I'm Jacob Cuoco, your host, and this podcast is all about giving practical sales and marketing insights to help you grow and scale your remodeling company. Now, if you are in any other home improvement space, then don't worry, you're going to find tons of value in here as well. Now, in the last episode, we spoke about the 3 essential pillars to building a high growth remodeling business, right? And today we're going to be going deep into something that's stealing tens of thousands from most remodelers, and they don't even realize it yet. It's not your close rate, it's not your ads, it's how fast and how well you're responding to leads. So I've put together the most important things that you need to be considering when putting together your lead nurture and lead capture process to stop having your hard-earned and expensive leads resulting in absolutely nothing, right? Now, let's kick off this call or this podcast by talking about a truth that absolutely nobody in the industry likes hearing, right? At the end of the day, if you're going to call a lead 30 minutes after they've come in, then the reality is you might as well just call them tomorrow, right? Now, it sounds harsh, but it's true. And the reason is this. If we think about things from a homeowner's perspective, right? They filled out a form on your website, whether it's, this come from an ad or they've just kind of, landed through SEO, whatever way, right? When they do so, it's very rarely a logical move. It's most times an emotional one, right? Whether they're feeling just generally overwhelmed, whether they're frustrated, right? There's something in their house that needs a change, right? And they've kind of reached that tipping point where they've decided to do what? Actually hand in that form submission, right? That form submission is them coming out and saying, look, I am in need of help, and I, in most cases, need help now, right? But what you have to remember is that with any type of emotional decision, there's peaks and then it begins to trough. And the peak of their emotional state is when they actually hand in the form. And that is going to just naturally start to decay the second that they hit submit. So rather than just kind of me talking about it, I want to kind of talk about some stats, right? So according to Modernize Home Services, the average homeowner fills out 3 to 5 contractor forms when they're doing research, right? And according to a study done by Lead Connect, 78% of homeowners go with the first company that calls them back, right? And that stat gets even more real when you consider that if you wait 5 minutes to respond, your chances of that lead converting drops by 80% or more. And despite that, only 7% of contractors respond within 5 minutes, according to a study done by Drift, right? So that means that 93% of the industry are too slow to be considered in most cases, right? And again, why do these stats matter? Why should we be thinking about them as a remodeling company? Well, again, as I said earlier, the more that you delay, the more that you're kind of losing that emotional urgency that comes with the form submit, right? And not only that, you're also going to be giving space for your competitors to jump in, right? And, at the end of the day, as these kind of homeowners are moving, throughout life, just because they, let's say they filled out your form and they filled out the form of 4 other companies, just because they filled out your form doesn't mean that they're going to continue to remember you, right? It's very, very, realistic that within 30 minutes, maybe they've got on the phone with a company that actually called them back quickly. They started to cook dinner and now they've completely forgotten about who you are, right? And, one thing that I always like to say to people when we're kind of talking about speed to lead is that there's probably never been a lead that actively gets more excited the longer that they wait for your call, right? When somebody hands in a form, in almost every circumstance, if they expect a call from you right away, if they wait 10 minutes, it's not as if they're going to be happier, right? So when it comes to speed to lead, it's not just about being fast. In an ideal world, we want to be first, and we want to be first with a purpose, right? And in order to do that, we need to have some sort of infrastructure in place, right? And this is where, it starts to get a little bit tactical. So as we said, in an ideal world, responding in 60 seconds or less is where we want to be across all of our inbound leads, right? And in order to do that, you are going to need some sort of, automated lead kind of alerts that go out, once a lead comes in, right? So that's going to go to ideally a rep. If you're still kind of taking these calls yourself, then it needs to go out to you. And there are tons of different, softwares that you can utilize to be able to do that. We use Go High Level as our CRM, and I personally recommend Go High Level. It's very easy, even if you had limited technical skills, to set up an automation that connects to your lead form. That ideally would be in this instance like a Go High Level form that will be able to, the second that a lead comes in, ping you a text. And my recommendation for that is that you have basic information on there. You have their name, you have their number in that text, so that you can immediately hit dial from the text message. And then additionally, if you have any contextual information on your forms, some forms are just going to be name, number, email. Some people, if you have different services, will have the specific service they're looking for. You want to have any contextual information that you can have, so that you understand what call you're going into, right? At the end of the day, if you don't have these processes in place, then the reality is that you're paying for these leads, but then you're just letting them die in your inbox, right? So this is very, very important. That speed is going to be a competitive advantage for you, right? And it's something that you can implement right away, because with speed to lead, it's not all about, or not primarily about, being perfect, right? It's just about being there in that moment when a homeowner is ready to act. And the moment that they're most ready to act is at the height of their emotional pain, the height of their emotional commitment. And that's probably why 80% of them go with the individual that reaches out first, right? Not to mention that usually that company knows what they're doing. Now, in terms of that first call, I found that a lot of remodeling companies kind of treat it like, just like a calendar task, right? Like an admin call. But it's really important to point out that it's absolutely not, right? This call that you're making is the first call in, or the first step in your sales process, right? And in a lot of cases, probably in most cases, it's going to be your only shot to actually shape how a homeowner sees your brand, right? If that homeowner doesn't close, but they've just got on a call with your intake team, if that member of the intake team doesn't do well, it's going to impact future things like, rehash, reactivation, lead nurture, right? So it's a very, very important process. Now, in terms of the call itself, you have to remember that in most cases, the homeowner is still somewhat unsure, right? So they've submitted that form, but as we said, it's maybe to multiple companies. They don't necessarily know who they want to work with yet, right? So if they're not confident in the direct company that they should be working with, then they're really just looking for somebody to actually take control of that process, right? So that's what that call can be for. The goal is not just to kind of schedule in an estimate. The goal is going to be to actually sell the appointment itself, right? Again, that call center, that intake team is the first layer of your sales. So it's really important that you stop treating them like they're the admin team, right? Now, this is where, scripting and things of that nature, as well as tonality, right? Tonality, that's something that we talk about in sales all the time. When people are set into the home, sales reps and sales managers are always talking about having tonality, having energy, a certain level of authority, right, in the house. The same thing applies to your call center or intake team, right? These calls aren't the correct time for kind of small talk or to be very, very passive in your language, right? We want to have certainty. We want to have that authority. We want to have that energy, because not just the words, which again are important, are going to win the call. It's going to be that kind of overall tonality that's important. So, for me, if I had to pick up kind of one of the biggest issues that I've seen with intake reps or call center reps, is that they kind of, stall in the kind of intro stage and they don't get to the value quick enough, right? So as part of that, they need to have a strong script so that they're not just winging the call, right? It's very easy to do a bunch of small talk and talk about the weather and talk about their favorite football team and things of that nature, but that's not actually what matters, right? Now, obviously there's two sides to the coin. You don't want them to script to the point where they sound robotic, but really and truly, when a script is done right and it's applied in the correct way, all it's going to do is make you sound like a professional, because you know what to say and you know how to say it, right? And again, the data on this speaks loud and clear, right? 78% of remodelers use somebody with zero sales training to actually handle those intake calls, right? That's bonkers. 78% of people use someone with zero active sales training to handle their intake calls, right? And when I talk about the kind of stalling in the intro, we found that the average rep takes 42 seconds before providing the person on the other end of the phone with, an actual reason to want to book with the company, right? They're just kind of dancing around kind of somewhat aimless topics, right? And then finally, most importantly, callers on the other end of the phone, the people that are speaking to your reps, they make a decision about your company in the first 6 seconds of a phone conversation, right? So if your rep is kind of dancing around and even if he's being nice, he's just kind of not getting into the meat of the conversation, you've missed that opportunity for a strong first impression. So if they don't come across as kind of sharp, they don't come across as clear, they don't come across as confident, then you've kind of set yourself behind before you even got going, right? And when you consistently get this wrong, you're going to be sending, untrained reps to handle your most valuable leads, which if they were going to the house, you wouldn't do. But as we can see, the majority of remodelers are having, your your biggest, most valuable leads who have to go through the intake process, speak to this untrained professional. They're going to sound, unsure. They're going to sound passive. They're going to sound, like they don't necessarily know what they're doing. And the homeowner isn't going to have tons of reason to actually kind of stay on that call, right? And that is what results in your marketing spend kind of going to waste, right? As I've said multiple times, again, I just want to really hammer this point in. You wouldn't let your worst salesperson actually go into the home, right? So my question to you is, why is that individual the first person that your lead speaks to on the phone? You need to actually really think about that, right? And again, a lot of people don't actively do it because they don't maybe understand the value of appointment setting. But when you frame it that way, it will become very clear to you that you need to very quickly get your intake team some training, right? That intake rep, they're not an admin individual. They are a salesperson, right? So whether you decide to actually train them like one is going to be completely up to you. But if they're not equipped with the skills, to be able to transfer belief in the company and also value to the prospect within literally seconds of the call, then they're not actually going to be prepared to handle, the leads that are coming through. So if you actually want to increase your revenue quickly, then you should probably start by training those who are on the front lines, right? To kind of get into the technical aspects of what they actually look like and what they should be doing, we have to remember that when a homeowner fills out a form, as we spoke about earlier, it's an emotional decision, right? So again, let's kind of think about it. Maybe they've been looking at their outdated bathroom or their broken cabinets for weeks. Maybe it's even been months, right? And there comes a moment where they decide to take action and they submit the form. And that's when the clock starts ticking for you guys, right? They might be really emotionally charged when they actually fill out that form. But 10 minutes later, if it's during the day, they've gone back to work, or maybe in 20 minutes later, they're making dinner, or 30 minutes later, they don't even remember who your company is, right? So if you are kind of waiting for a homeowner to remember why they filled out the form, then you're already too late. And what I mean by that is that when a homeowner fills out the form, right, there's a specific reason as to why. But humans are very emotional creatures that priorities change and shift by the minute. When they get a call from you, they should kind of physically feel the same emotion that caused them to type in, bathroom remodeler near me, window replacement company near me, right? And the longer that you wait, the more likely they are to forget that reason, and you're kind of behind the ball, right? And that is why, conversion rates, traditionally speaking, are 8 times higher when leads are contacted within the first 5 minutes, right? And according to Inside Sales, who did a report on this, contacting a lead within 5 minutes actually makes you 21 times more likely to qualify them than waiting 30 minutes or more, right? 21 times more likely. So this isn't like some sort of theoretical kind of nonsense that I'm putting out there. This is kind of real proven behavior, right? With that being said, if you do end up waiting that time, right? A lot of people kind of talk about how, these leads are cold, whether they're a aggregated lead or even in inbound case, which is crazy to me. Again, even if it's like a Facebook lead, which generally has, lower, maybe lower pain thresholds than, let's say, like a Google or PPC click, these people still went out of their way to fill out the form. And it doesn't actually mean that they kind of have gone cold because they've changed their mind. It's just that the same urgency that they had when they filled out the form has just faded. When you get in touch with them, even if it's, let's say, 2 minutes after they filled out the form and that urgency has already began to fade, the job of your rep is to kind of rebuild the emotion that they had when they filled out the form, right? So you want to try and remind them, what caused them to actually reach out, why they wanted help. You want to do that in a way where you're kind of, speaking with clarity and confidence, and then you want to, use that momentum that you've built to move them quickly into that next step, right? We kind of refer to that as an actual momentum transfer, right? That's the kind of the language that I use when I'm speaking to reps. You want to transfer that momentum into that next step. And that's the kind of emotional momentum that is built up when they actually fill out that form, right? But at the end of the day, we also have to live in reality, right? We can't act as if we have the kind of perfect process in place that every single lead is going to be so emotionally charged that we're going to be able to kind of transfer that emotion directly into the booking, and if we call every lead within 30 seconds, we're going to have an 100% set rate, right? Another key part of your intake team or your lead nurture process or your lead intake process is persistence, right? At the end of the day, a very substantial number of deals are going to happen after multiple contacts, right? So if we think about it from the homeowner's perspective, they're juggling 10 things at once. They probably have kids. They are probably working a job, right? They probably have some sort of a social life. Frankly, again, if we just think about it from our perspective, it's 7:00 in the evening. They filled out the form, but they do want to spend that hour watching whatever TV show that they watch that night, right? And they just don't want to be on the phone with a sales professional when the phone rings right away, right? But what a lot of reps will do, or what a lot of companies will do, they'll just kind of make that first call, not get anything back, and they'll just kind of assume that the individual isn't interested, right? But through doing that, you're literally going to burn thousands in wasted leads that you could have closed if you were just a little bit more persistent, right? So yes, urgency and speed to lead is something that you need to really focus on, but you need to make sure that you're also having things in place to make sure that you're able to follow up effectively with these individuals. At the end of the day, for me, I found that, a lot of companies focus on kind of politeness and not wanting to over message or over contact these individuals. But remember, follow up isn't spam. It's literally it's part of you providing them with a service, in my opinion, right? And this politeness that you're focused on is actually costing you money in the bank and appointments and closed deals, right? Because I think a lot of remodelers will really underestimate how many touch points it takes to book a lead in many cases, and also how many touch points in many cases. Again, there's always outliers on both sides of the spectrum. How many touch points it's going to take to actually really piss a lead off, right? I've heard tons of people assume that like just because they didn't answer after a couple of tries that the prospect like isn't serious. But in many cases they're just distracted by their life. So it's important that you have this kind of mindset shift, right? And oftentimes a homeowner isn't annoyed by your follow-up. They're just, overwhelmed. Maybe they've reached out to tons of people and they're just a bit disorganized, but they filled out your form for a specific reason. So your job is to make sure that you follow through on that request and you don't want to wait for them to chase you. So in my opinion, you shouldn't assume that kind of that silence that you're hearing is just disinterest. It's oftentimes, again, they're just overwhelmed. They're disorganized in life right now. It's just kind of bad timing. And you need to, reframe that follow-up process as actually a form of customer service that needs to be done right and not done in a kind of salesy, pressury way, but if done correctly, again, can actually be customer service, right? So for me, in terms of that follow-up process, I found that kind of that random follow-up results in random results. You need to have some sort of a system in place, right? So with that being said, I would say that you want to have kind of pre-planned follow-up windows at first, right? And that's going to change from lead to lead. So you also want to have, varying methods, right? You don't want to just reach out by phone or just reach out by SMS or just reach out by email. You want to tie all of the various methods together to be able to, try and get in contact with these individuals and also spread out the touch points. Like if I've gotten, I don't know, it's been a week and I've gotten 10 texts from a company, I'm probably going to be a bit frustrated. I'm going to feel like I'm getting spammed. But if I've gotten 3 emails, 3 calls, or 4 calls or even 5 calls and 2 texts over a week period of time, it's very unlikely that lead is going to feel like they're getting spammed, but you've touched them 10 times. And with that said, using the different outlets, you can actually have messaging that's going to add value to them and not just check in, right? Again, they may not respond, but if every time you are contacting them, you're providing some sort of value, some sort of resource, something that they can use to either inspire them or build trust or just provide general value, it's going to, again, help with you and that feeling of feeling like you're spamming people and instead just being a valuable, trustworthy partner in the process, right? So again, if you're relying on that kind of memory or manual kind of follow-up process, I promise you're losing leads every single day that you've just forgotten about, right? You need to have it built into your CRMs. It needs to have automations. It needs to be checked. It needs to be, you're checked and tracked every single day, right? And again, just to kind of touch on a couple of numbers, right? We found across all industries, not just the remodeling sector in all fairness, most sales, they require anywhere between 5 to 12 contacts, right? So if your reps are giving up after 2 to 3, you're just not giving yourself a shot, right? And your costs per booked appointment is going to drop significantly when you actually get better at that follow-up process because you're going to maximize the leads that are already coming in, right? Your best lead that might want to do, a kitchen and bathroom remodel that's worth $100,000 to you, they may not respond until that 4th or 5th touch point, right? So it's important that you emphasize to your reps that, following up once isn't just bad sales, but it's also wasted marketing dollars, right? It's very important that you frame it that way because in reality, that's what it is. So when you're when you're doing that follow-up, there's kind of a few key principles that you need to remember, right? If I had to kind of give you three main things to think about, you need to be specific, right? So you need to remind them, what you've reached out for. Don't just be checking in, right, consistently. You want to make sure that you're being confident, right? You don't need to, dance around the topic or feel bad. Again, you are offering them a service. You're, in terms of making sure that you're staying on top of them, right? And then, you need to make sure that you're consistent, right? You need to systemize that process so that you don't have to kind of rely on whether, you remember or whether you're in the right mood for it, right? And then finally, in terms of actually kind of bringing this thing all together, if you don't track the numbers, you're not going to be able to improve this stuff, right? So a ton of companies will track the obvious stuff, right? Cost per lead, appointment set, job sold, things of that nature, right? And that's okay at a surface level, but it's not enough to just kind of figure out whether, you're actually, leaking money, right? You need to make sure that you're tracking real statistics, like, the time it's taking for you to follow up, the number of follow attempts per rep and per lead, the show up rate that you're seeing per rep, the quality of those appointments and what percentage they're actually closing at, right? How much revenue each lead is worth to you, right? The net sale per lead issued, right? These are all important things that you can track to make sure that you're staying on top and actually building a system that's not built on hope. It's actually, a full-on plan, right? So with that being said, the more structure that you have in that system, the less you're going to have to rely on luck. And again, it doesn't need to be perfect, but, having a system in place is definitely going to help you increase that revenue, right? So guys, again, coming up on time here. That's it for the episode today. If this kind of helped you or made you kind of rethink how you guys are handling your leads, then make sure you send that to somebody in the industry who needs to hear it. And if you want to connect, feel free to reach out to me at Jacob Cuoco or Jewoo, at elevatemarketinggroup.co.uk or on LinkedIn at Jacob Cuoco, as I'm always happy to chat. And of course, make sure you follow the podcast so you don't miss another episode. We'll see you guys next time.